Welcome. So this is supposed to be our official start. Now we had a little pre-start with Richard Curtis. Please come take a seat. There's a seat in the front. And it is my honor and privilege to introduce Ian Bremmer. And Ian is going to give us some insight into this coming week. We all know there's a lot of exciting things happening geopolitically, and I can't think of any greater commentary that we could have than from Ian, who's an absolute pro and has some very deep insights that I think will be useful to our members all over the world. So I will ask Ian to give just a little bit of background on himself before he tells us about what's going to be happening this week, some of the big geopolitical trends, and if we could allow some time at the end for some questions, that would be very kind. Ian, with no further ado, please.
Cheers. Thank you very much. I just got here as well. It's wonderful to kick off Davos with this organization, right? YPO, if you have to pick an organization to get behind, both in terms of, sort of community, values that matter, a level of engagement, inspiration. I mean, every event I've ever done with YPO, you come away saying, I like this organization, you want to do more with them. I will also say that it's said that I was going to be here for an hour and a half. That's not true. You only have half an hour that you have to deal with me, and that's perfectly fine. But I talk quickly, so we'll get through a lot. My background, I'm a political scientist. I started a firm for political scientists, trying to make it relevant to how the markets work globally, called Eurasia Group. That was back in '98. It's grown organically. Today it's global, 9 offices, 200 folks. YPOs understand this story, right? So yeah, we've all done the same stuff. But for Davos, right? So maybe let me start with something a little more controversial, which is like, Davos has 2 really big problems right now. And what I mean is we have 2 really big problems right now, right? Because, fundamentally, this is a platform, a unique global platform to promote globalism, to promote the idea that borders becoming more and more porous to the exchange of people and goods and services and data is a good thing, that more growth will come from that humanity will be better served by more of that. Now, by the way, I happen to believe that. I'm a card-carrying globalist, right? But that doesn't mean it works for everyone, and that doesn't mean that it is seen to work for everyone. I mean, when you talk about the people that are really upbeat these days, Steve Pinker, Bill Gates, right? Everything that's behind why they're upbeat is because globalization continues to pursue, right? It's all about only 10% of 1-year-olds today in the world aren't immunized. That's extraordinary. I mean, the level of extreme poverty that's been reduced, that's extraordinary, right? We can talk about the inequality that has been growing, but you also have to talk about the extraordinary rise of a single global middle class, that hump that we've created, which is more than any other section of humanity in the history we've been on this little planet has ever pulled off. But here's the issue. This year is a tipping point. And it's a tipping point in a couple of different ways. Number one, it's a tipping point because globalization is no longer speeding up. And it had been. For as long as all of us in this room have been alive, globalization has been speeding up, right? When World War II was over, it's speeding up. The US creates all these institutions, speeding up. The Chinese start opening in the 70s and 80s, it's speeding up. 1988, the wall comes down. 91, the Soviet Union collapses, it's speeding up. 2020, the Chinese decide, with some support from the United States, that we should decouple our technology systems from each other, our data systems, our cloud. In my view, that is by far the biggest step away from globalization in my lifetime. And I think that's a tipping point. I don't think we're going to redress that in a year or two. Now, I don't think it's the end of globalization, but my God, it's a problem for this place, right? And it's important to recognize that this is still, by far, the most important group of globalists that come together to talk about how to advance that agenda in the world. But it's no longer the most important meeting of stakeholders. That would be Belt and Road. More heads of state, more money, more decisions getting made, more data. We need to be aware of that, right? And they're competitive. We may not like it, but it's true. Now, is that the end of globalization? No. And to be fair, it's not even the end of globalization in terms of US and China relations. I mean, if you ask me, if you look at the bottom piece of the global economy in terms of what is and is not advanced, so commodities trade, I would argue commodities trade is actually becoming more globalized. Still, not less. Oil and gas, food, and not just because of the Phase 1 deal that's been agreed between the US and Chinese. I mean, you all saw that the Saudis had 50% of their oil taken off the global market by Iranian missile hits. You all saw that the impact on global energy price was comparatively limited. Why? Well, because the global energy market is becoming more global, right? That's a good thing. That's more efficiency. We like that. And we like that with food. And we like it with rare earths. But the most advanced part of the global economy, when we're talking about data and AI and applications and the regulations around that and the information that people consume, and that maybe isn't what bothers us the most, but perhaps should, because the history of humanity is that when we consume completely different information from other groups of human beings, we tend to dehumanize the other group. And that's now going to be much more dramatic in the way we as communities interact with each other. So as a political scientist looking at globalization, I worry about the volatility that will come as a consequence of the decisions that are presently being made. That's one. I said there were two reasons why we here at the WEF have some challenges. The second, of course, is that that's happening at the same time that our own societies, democracies, both advanced industrial democracies and emerging market democracies, are feeling less legitimized. Larger and larger numbers of people in our own systems are saying that these systems do not work for us, that they're rigged. And that's obviously true in what's happening in the United States right now, with an impeachment that will fail in Senate, with an election that will be seen as rigged by the losing side, which we can talk about if you like. Certainly we saw that with Brexit. We've seen it across Europe, but we're also seeing it in India. I mean, India has a fantastic growth story, and yet in the last 6 months, 9 months, as that growth story has become more constrained, the nationalism, the populism, the anti-Muslim sentiment has grown in extraordinary fashion. Brazil today, Bolsonaro, a lot of people don't like him. He's not even here at the WEF. He canceled at the last minute, said it was security concerns, mostly because he doesn't want to be beaten the crap out of by a whole bunch of people here in the media. But the fact is that he represents today, by far, the most comprehensive economic reformer in any major emerging market, if you look at what he's doing, macro and micro. But we also know, or we should know, that if the global economy continues to soften and suddenly his popularity really tanks, and it's already getting weaker, you think he's going to continue to stick with first and foremost pro-market reforms, or is he going to turn towards us versus them, towards this is a system that is being rigged against you, and I'm the only person that can solve it. Now, it is an unfortunate coincidence that the U.S. and Chinese are unwinding our technological integration at the same time as our political institutions are becoming delegitimized. And one of the reasons it's unfortunate, that coincidence, is because the people that are focusing on those two issues, the Venn diagrams of those two circles, do not overlap, right? So if you're someone out there in the United States national security and you're really focused on China, you're really not focused on are our own democratic institutions delegitimized. If you're Elizabeth Warren and you're Bernie Sanders and you're talking about capitalism doesn't work, you're not talking about, oh my God, I'm really worried about these Chinese institutions and the fact that we're not able to work with them effectively anymore and our corporates can't have access. It's hard to fix this. It's hard to fix this. Is there good news out there? Of course there's good news. I mean, I mentioned it's not the end of globalization, number one. But we should also recognize that in advanced industrial democracies, the ability to buffer yourselves from demands of rising populism is high. So, I mean, Trump was elected in the US. He said he was going to drain the swamp. No swamp is being drained. We have lots of nationalists in, now by the way, some people might say they're angry about that, but generally speaking, the WEF community does not want the swamp drained, right? If we're being honest, right? Europeans, you have lots of nationalism in lots of different countries in Europe. Again, we've seen the UK, we've seen it in France, the backlash against Macron, even now as he's trying to finally move forward on pensions. You see it obviously in Italy, where this government is probably about to collapse in relatively short order, and the Lega, the League, is doing, of course, the best. But because in Europe, supranational institutions remain strong, and because there is no Nationalists of Europe Unite movement, right, which means you don't know what flag populists would all fly if they wanted to get together. What that means is that the new group of European leaders in Brussels, the von der Leyens, the Lagardes, the Gentilonis, all of whom are like here in Davos, they, of course, are easily as strong pro-European leaders as anything we've seen in decades. And then you've got Japan, which is still functionally a single-party democracy, and they're the one major democracy out there that doesn't have the populism. Why not? Well, number one, no inequality to speak of, right? Number two, because they're not fighting wars that are unpopular. Number three, virtually no immigration. Number four, they're not on social media the way we are in the rest of the West, and so less fake news. Put that all together, that's nice. What that means is that the advanced industrial economies, despite everything I just said, these warnings of populism, yes, populism will continue to grow because people are getting angrier, especially with the economy getting softer. The IMF just today came out and downgraded for the second time in 3 months their global expectations for economic growth in 2020 and in 2021. So clearly, if we had a lot of populism rising when the economy was going gangbusters, it's going to get worse in this environment. But I wouldn't expect there to be much policy impact in the wealthy countries. That's interesting. I'd expect to see much more policy impact in the emerging markets that get whiplashed by this, right? And clearly, we're seeing that in Mexico today. I mean, clearly Piñera today in Chile is a radically different politician in what he's trying to accomplish than he was 6 months ago before the enormous demonstrations forcing him to change the constitution. And again, India. And I can go Indonesia. We go lots of places. So I think, you wanted me to talk for 15 minutes. That sounds like it was 15 minutes. I'm happy to get into any of those big macro issues, or we can get into some of the big headlines. You probably saw we put our 2020 risks outlook, top risk outlook, just out last week. We're looking at Iran, of course. We're looking at the U.S. elections. We're looking at U.S.-China. We're looking at all this stuff. Wherever you want to take me is fine. This is a great audience, and it's truly global, which is what makes it fun. But also is why I felt like when you want a 2020 scene setter for Davos, you kind of really, I want to give you guys the macro trends because they matter, right? So anyway, a little provocative, hopefully not too dispiriting, and tell me what you'd like to ask about. And feel free to disagree, that's no problem. Yeah, this is a fun and friendly group. Mike.
So you touched on social media, and obviously that's a growing thing around the world. Every single emerging economy, seems to have its own kind of transplant of it, and you've got it in Russia, different systems, and China has also different social media systems. And with the rise, as you mentioned, of fake news, a lot of these platforms are deciding whether they should intervene. And there's a lot of discourse about that in journalism, in the media. What are your thoughts? Do you think they should get involved? Do you think they're responsible for making sure that there isn't this echo chamber of fake news, as is so often referenced these days? Or do you think, it's a business, they have no place to actually step in?
Well, it's a hard question because, I mean, you can say that they have no place to step in, but you also have to recognize that in Washington, the leaders don't understand these issues. They just don't have the bandwidth. They move incredibly quickly. They have very few people that have, first of all, they can't afford the people with the private sector expertise. Secondly, these issues are pretty new. Third, a lot of these leaders have been in place for an awful long time, and they're kind of path dependent. They think of the world. I mean, when Joe Biden says that China is not a problem, in part it's because he hasn't been there in a bunch of years. And no, I mean, when foreign policy in the United States is run largely by white men who are over 65, you're not going to get coherent tech policy out of the United States. That's just reality. So I think that even if our preference would be that the government effectively regulates this, we need to understand that when it comes to tech and the US, that's not going to happen. Now, the Europeans are clearly much more capable on this front, partially because they have more resources devoted to it, partially because they don't have the corporates, right? So put both those things together. I mean, why is it that you got GDPR out of Europe? I mean, you may not like it and all the privacy and copyright stuff they're doing, but they are a regulatory superpower. The United States is not. And I think that's important. And the fact that California is now picking up some of those regulations because the US has functionally abdicated and Europe is big enough that you want access to it, so you're going to move in that direction because you think sooner or later that's where you're going, that's interesting. It should make you a little more optimistic. Do we want the corporates to do more? Yes. Will they? I mean, number one, in an environment where the global economy is starting to slow, the growth is certainly slowing. And secondly, where there's a lot of techlash coming against these corporates, and the average CEO only lasts 5 years, then I suspect that those corporates are going to focus more on bottom line, laser-like, than they are on expanding stakeholders, right? So I'm not expecting very much from them. And secondly, I don't think most of them know how to do it. I mean, certainly if you look at the tech sector right now in the US, Microsoft and Google have been around for longer. Microsoft is mostly B2B. They're bigger. They have more resources in some ways devoted to this stuff. I suspect they'll be more effective. Do I think Facebook or Twitter is going to get this right? I don't. Even if they wanted to, I don't think they're going to get this right. So again, my expectation for this is that 2020, we're going to have an election that will have external interference, will have extraordinary amounts of fake news. Not only that, but we know that McConnell in Senate has already refused to even put a vote to devoting resources towards shoring up election security. Now, there are many reasons why he might or might not choose to do that, but the point is it's one more way in which this is going to be broken. So everyone that's a consumer of social media clearly has to understand that at least heading into this electoral cycle, this situation is not in any way going to improve. We have to know that. Right? Yeah. It's an honest answer to a very hard question. So.
Hi, my name is Darsono Hartono from YPO Indonesia.
Hey.
I think we start seeing this nationalism, less globalization that you see. But in the meantime, I start seeing new globalization of the climate change and climate justice. I mean, people like Greta came here and like telling all the CEO to do all that stuff. But do you see that this thing, this millennial and this new trend is going to continue, or is it just going to be, will it be always said that, oh, Davos is too elite, they don't care about us? I mean, this climate justice movement, this is one way of globalization too, because they really care for this issue. Do you think it's going to be sustained?
I do think it's going to be sustained. I don't know that it's going to be driven first and foremost by one of the highest constellations of private planes in the world, right? Like I doubt that. But we are clearly much more aware. We're clearly much more concerned. I mean, those of you that took the car or the train up today actually saw the anti-climate change messages inscribed in the snow. I mean, these things are not irrelevant, right? You get a lot of, sooner or later you get anecdotes, they become data. And I think when you look at young people, even in the United States, over 40, conservative-oriented Americans say, climate change not really a priority. Under 40, left or right, they're both saying it. That's change. That's change in 5 years, right? Those figures are real. The fact that the governments are not doing enough, I think, is leading to a lot of backlash, right? And BlackRock had been saying a lot over the last few years, but now this week they're actually starting to do something. Microsoft, same. Those are real things, in my view. Those are real commitments that are going to actually matter, and other companies will have to get more on the bandwagon, especially in terms of portfolio investments. That's the good side of this. But there are a bunch of bad sides, right? One bad side is it's because the governments aren't doing enough, not even close. Well, what are the implications of that for the next 20, 30 years? Pretty severe. There's starting to be an economic constraint on globalization that comes from the planet. We've never had that before. We've had constraints that come from us individually, politically. We've had economic cycles. That's also a constraint largely from us. We've never had the world saying, actually, we're going to constrain your growth because we can't sustain this. That's what's happening. But then there's another piece, which is as this grows in an environment where we don't have a single set of global political institutions, you're going to see more geoengineering and other geopolitical responses around things like waterways, around things like, air quality, that will benefit certain countries and not benefit other countries that are right across the border, and that's going to cause more war. That's going to cause more conflict. So clear, on the one hand, we all live in one planet, and we're all going to have to develop more effective ways of talking about resource. We don't need a Green New Deal. We need a Green Marshall Plan. That's fairly obvious. One of the things I liked about Microsoft is they're saying that by 2050, they're going to actually be carbon neutral for their entire history. Now imagine if the Americans said that we were going to do that for the planet, geopolitically, because then you'd talk about not just what the Chinese are emitting now, much more than us, but you'd actually talk about the equity of how much emissions have affected the planet to date, which is what's, of course, causing the feedback mechanism. Now, we are not close to that happening, right? You don't see any of the American dark green political types saying we need to spend a lot more money to ensure that the Chinese have social justice around climate. No way. We're moving far away from that. India, too, far away from that, right? So given that, the likelihood that as this becomes really expensive for the poorest and most forgotten people on the planet, and their governments get desperate and start taking some of the technological decisions that can help make it for them, like, for example, pumping sulfur particles into the troposphere that would actually allow for, a reduction short-term in warming, which Bill Gates is putting money into so he can understand the implications, not because he thinks it's a good idea. I expect you'll see a lot more international conflict. So it's not clear. The people that say that climate will clearly bring the world together because it's one world are really not thinking about the interim steps of getting there, right? And usually when you get from fragmented world to one world, the way you get there usually implies crisis first, right? That's the case. So, yeah. So far, so much fun. Yeah. Can we get the mic? Yeah. And then we have one in the back here.
Thank you, Ian. You mentioned about top 10 risks, and top 3 are to do with the U.S. U.S. election, U.S. China, and decoupling. And you pointed out about the risk. How shall we prepare for those risks?
Yeah. Well, I think that the China risks and the U.S. are fundamentally U.S.-China risks. The question of, for example, where the virtual Berlin Wall will go, the 18 countries that China's already exported data and surveillance networks to, mostly small countries, but they're going to grow, they're going to become much more important, is South Korea on their side or on our side, especially given the critical importance to the Chinese of having control of their supply chain for semiconductors and related materials. If you're a corporation, you need to understand that you will invest differently in countries that will have different data, different standards. So that's not true for every company in the world. It's important to recognize that the challenges to globalization are different in different sectors. Even when we talk about manufacturing and services sector, There, it's the fourth industrial revolution, term came up with here by Klaus Schwab, but a lot of people on the other side of that view it as the post-industrial revolution, because if you're not giving me a job, there's nothing fourth industrial about it, right? And in that regard, it's clear that we're going to have a shrinking of supply chain, right? As you decouple labor from capital. I don't think that's a disaster, but it's definitely going to hurt countries in emerging markets that previously thought they had demographic advantages, like India, for example, right? That's a worry. So I think that if you're a corporate, number one, you have to understand how your sector is affected by some of these changes that are vastly differentiated, whether it's advanced technology, middle advanced technology or non-tech input technology. And then you need to understand how it's affecting the countries that you're invested in. So it's a matrix of two separate types of things. It's a sector matrix and a geography matrix that, again, 91, the Soviet Union collapses, and for roughly 20 years, 25, even 30 after that, you didn't really have to pay as much attention to these things. There's a lot of country risk, but not so much the macro. Now, the U.S. piece is separate. And the U.S. was the top risk this year in part because the United States is simply the largest economy in the world, and we are about to have an election which will be seen as rigged and illegitimate by the losing side. And I think that means that for a period of a few weeks to a few months, governance isn't going to work in the U.S. I see that as more of a risk for the markets, the financial markets, than I do for corporates. So the number one risk is not really much of a corporate risk. And by the way, if you go into that report, you'll notice I didn't write anything particularly about what happens if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren become president. And that's not just because I don't think it's likely, though it's true I don't think it's likely. It's also because they're not going to have 60 senators on the Democratic side. And I go back to how much does populism actually become policy in advanced industrial democracies. And I would say even in the US, if you had an extremely unorthodox, progressive president, the amount of impact on policy changing risk environment is pretty limited. It's not like Corbyn becoming PM in the UK, which would have been dramatically different in a smaller country, but dramatically different. Yeah, sure. What do I think about the Middle East, specifically UAE? Well, I mean, there's no question that the UAE is setting itself up to be Singapore, right? I mean, it's becoming more transparent in terms of metrics in investment and data for how the government's actually doing. It's bringing young people into the government and advising the government, not just Emirati, but globally. Having said that, it's not Switzerland. Why not? Because it's in the middle of the Middle East, right? I mean, the fact that you've got the Straits of Hormuz neighboring and the potential for real disruptions, the fact that you still have a war with a ceasefire that's not really holding in Yemen, that the Emiratis and the Saudis have engaged in proselytizing, the fact that Iran itself is not imploding, but under a massive amount of pressure, and certainly we're not going to see a breakthrough anytime soon. Those things are all vulnerabilities for the Emiratis. I'm very pleased that we're getting close to a breakthrough that'll end the blockade on Qatar. And clearly we've seen that with the last GCC meeting. Clearly we've seen that with sports teams engaging and playing with each other. I think it's smart and sensible. The Omanis have played a strong role in helping to facilitate that. Kuwait also to a degree. That's good. But I mean, clearly, if you ask me going forward in the next 5-10 years, do I think the Middle East is going to be a more peaceful place? It's hard to make that argument. Do I think the Emiratis are going to do very well in the context of that? Yeah, I really do. I really do. I mean, if you're going to make a bet on a Gulf state, you're not even close. But I would also say, let's keep in mind, Mohammed bin Salman is hosting the G20 this year. And his Davos in the desert was every bit as successful this year as it was 2 years ago, with the interim year being the Khashoggi murder and all of that. I do think that we talked about Bolsonaro, we talked about Modi. Let's talk about MBS, another person who has obvious downside, but also is engaging in substantive transformational reform inside his society, getting rid of the religious police on the streets, getting young people into jobs, getting women into society who are quite educated but had been massively underemployed. Those are things that before MBS, no one thought was happening in Saudi Arabia. Now it's happening. So I think it's important to recognize, even with a lot of leaders around the world that we see plenty of downside with, Duterte in the Philippines would be another one, even Trump, right? It's very bad to be in a situation where because you don't like a leader, you don't like what a leader stands for in certain ways, they're anathema to you, that means that you necessarily criticize that leader across the board. I think that's a dangerous thing to do. Of course, it's becoming what we do, right? Because you only follow the leaders you like and the media that supports that position as opposed to the other way around. And I've had a lot of experience with that in the US. But that makes it, I think, all the more valuable to recognize both the up and the downside in societies like this. In the Middle East, of course, those contradictions are very, very apparent. Yeah. Do we have time for one or two more? I hope so. Good. Twitters.
Ian, I think you just made a trip to Africa.
Yes.
And what are your thoughts on the continent which has a billion people? It's not being talked about very much.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I don't understand how people don't make trips to Africa, right? I mean, it's amazing. Like, you go talk to major multinational CEOs in the United States and even in Europe, and so many of them don't set foot in a continent of over 1 billion people. It's kind of crazy to think about. And the expansion of human capital. I mean, if you realize that irrespective, yes, massively impacted by climate change, especially equatorial Africa, massively impacted by bad governance. The infrastructure isn't built. There largely isn't intra-Africa trade still. But you take all of these people, you urbanize them, and you get them data. You get them, and through that data, you transform the educational system, the agricultural system, and the healthcare system. How is that not the most exciting investment story in the world? How are those people not coming up with some of the most exciting new solutions for the kind of entrepreneurialism that this world needs? And it can't just come from the West. How are you not excited about that? So that's why I went, right? And it's not the first time I've been. I've been many, many times. But historically, I've been going mostly to South Africa, and Nigeria and Egypt. But this week, I finally got my ass to Ethiopia, as you know. And how can you not be excited about 110 million people with a government that's actually transforming both the economy and the political system? Now, it's really clear that it's starting from a very, very low base. But I was someone that, my company's called Eurasia Group, and back in 92, I was living in Ukraine, right? And 93, Kazakhstan. And I got to tell you, I can't remember being so excited about a political transformation in my life as what I just saw in Ethiopia. It's been since the early 90s when the Soviet Union just collapsed. And that's pretty cool. So for those of you that don't spend time in Africa, and I know that this guy's going to lead a trip of a whole bunch of YPOs over there soon, which is fantastic. And of course, the WEF is going to be in Addis in September, I think, which is also pretty cool. But I think it's fantastic. I think it's fantastic. I think we should spend more time on it, definitely. Yeah, so thanks for that. Sir?
So, the demographic dividend or the demographic disaster, from an Indian perspective. Last year, the unemployment in Uttar Pradesh, one of the largest states, was 5%. Now it's 9.5% in 1 year. That's because of the youngsters coming in, a job every second. So how do you address this crisis in terms of Industry 4.0 as well? So,
I mean, first of all, it's good to see that the same Modi government that a year ago was telling the corporate leaders in India, we know everything, don't tell us, this is all fine, is now becoming a little bit more modest. Modi's inviting him in, the cabinet ministers are inviting him in, they're listening more, they're recognizing that they had some serious screw-ups. And I mean, look, domestically, India is now going through both Lehman Brothers and Enron combined with the crisis that you guys have experienced. It's not a financial crisis globally, but my God, for India, it's taken 100 basis points off growth. There's no question that's negatively affecting Modi and human capital. And one of the reasons he decided to turn towards Kashmir and the citizenship law and all this other stuff that's really not good for India's future, but awesome for Modi short term, right? I also think that, and look, and I don't think he's given up on economic reforms. I mean, corporate tax rate was reduced after most recent election. They did nothing on privatizations first time around. They're moving on privatizations now. It's more of a priority. So I don't write Modi off. I just think if I was 70-30 on Modi in his first year, I'm more like 30-70 on Modi now, right? Beyond, and this is a world that doesn't do 70-30, 30-70. It does 100-0, right? And India social media is even more toxic than American social media. It's pretty extraordinary, but I have experienced that. But beyond that, I mean, we do have to ask ourselves, like in China, the ability of the government to ensure that inefficient labor is employed is really high. And there's increasingly lots and lots of inefficient labor in China. Well, I know where there's even more inefficient labor, and more of it's coming online every day, and that's India. But the government doesn't have the capacity to ensure those people are employed. And the social safety net is weaker, it's more frayed. And you're more dependent on coal, right? And there aren't as many resources to respond to this stuff. So as much as I don't believe that the Indian democracy is going to fall apart, the pluralism of views and the extraordinary nature of what it means, the complexity of governing a country like India. Like, I don't think that Modi gets to be authoritarian, even data empowered, in the same way that Erdogan didn't get to be authoritarian in Turkey, even less so in India. But if you ask me 10 years out, do I bet on India as a demographic dividend an advantage given where they're presently heading? The answer is no. And it pains me to say that, because I love going there, and they have so much potential. I really worry that they're doing nothing on AI. I really worry they're so far behind. I mean, they've got a small number of incredibly well-educated people, but they're putting nowhere near the resources into this that the Chinese are or the Americans are. And here's an interesting point to just recognize, and maybe we close on this, is it is true that there are lots of ways around the world that we can say the Chinese are eating America's lunch, because they've got Belt and Road and we don't, and they do long-term strategy and policies and we don't, and we're leaving the Paris Climate Accord, we say no to TPP, and the Chinese come to Davos and they say, we like free trade, all this kind of stuff, right? But let's also keep in mind that America's balance of power vis-a-vis American allies is increasing dramatically in America's favor. People don't appreciate that. I mean, I'm talking energy production, I'm talking food production, I'm talking tech corporations and innovation, I'm talking the scale of the military and what it can accomplish, space, and of course, I'm also talking about the geopolitical dividend of the United States, which is in a part of the world that isn't particularly unstable. We've got Venezuela. They get stopped at Colombia largely. Huge problem for the Colombians, much worse for the Venezuelans. But for America, fine, right? So I think for people that believe that Trump is going to lose in November, and then next year's Davos, we're going to have one of the two candidates that the New York Times just fell fit not to bother to endorse. I know, I'm a little pissy about that. But I don't think it matters as much as you might for America's no longer unilateral. I think this unilateralist moment for the United States is actually more structural than Trump. And it's going to be really hard to convince the average American that they need to change that. And that's going to be a hard nut for a lot of American allies to swallow. It's going to make it more challenging going forward. So I think that's interesting. It's worth talking about. Anyway, I can stick around for a little bit if you guys want to come up and say hi. Again, I'm really happy to kick this off for you. I'm sure you're going to have a vastly successful Davos. I'm glad YPO's here, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Wow, what a tour de force of geopolitical analysis. I could see the disappointment from people who were asking questions who were just hoping to trip him up and not have some real insight. I mean, it's amazing. You could touch any subject. And I think what's really key is that a lot of us come and we get these very simplistic messages and we just see things in a black and white way. And then when you look at it, and so you talk about some of these leaders who we have particular opinions about, and you suddenly dig a little bit deeper and you realize it isn't all that we think. And in fact, some of the things that we wish for maybe are not things that actually we want to have happen. And it's just, as we start this week and as we process the amazing amount of data that we're going to be getting, data is fantastic, but if you don't really understand what you're getting, if you don't analyze it, and if you don't have one of the world's foremost commentators to give us a little bit of prep as to how we take in that data, I think would be all the poorer for it. So Ian, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And let's have a great week. Thank you. And now, nobody go. We are going to start off with a little bit of an introduction as to what we're going to be doing during the week. And with that, may I ask Pascal Gherkin, who was our chairman 2018-19 and the chairing the hub. We've been an incredible team here with Scott and a whole bunch of great people who you'll all get to know over the next coming days. And just a little bit of background, what we're doing here, why the first time in our 68-year history we're here. Pascal.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Welcome, everyone. And welcome to our hub. I was a very small architect, I would say, of the 3.0 in the strategy committee, and I was really blessed as chairman last year to be in charge and to really bring 3.0 to life in our organization. And it's all, as you know, about impact, it's about relevance, it's about diversity, please, and it's also about prominence. So with regard to prominence, let me just back up again. A few years ago, there were meetings in YPO Davos, very small structure, we couldn't get together. And last year, for the very first time, we had the chance in the Hilton to meet together and to create a unique YPO moment for exactly an hour and a half. And I do remember the frustration at the 91st minutes. We were simply accompanied out to the meeting room and we looked, wow, that was a warm moment. YPOs were together. It was excellent, but we were out. And so I want to thank management, I want to thank Scott, I want to thank Maurice and the whole team for giving the chance today with the board of directors to have our own, very own hub for YPO this year. A place where we can mingle, a place where we can be together, and also a place where we're going to have some great content. And I want to give the mic back before I continue to my friend Maurice to explain you the week at a glance and what you're going to discover throughout the week with us.
Lovely. Thank you, Pascal. So we have sent everybody a program, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but just a quick overview because I know a lot of us are inundated with emails in our inboxes and probably haven't seen everything. So just a quickie, but I'm not going to give you the whole background to each. We've got 4 days. It's got a lot of stuff happening. So just quickly. So we had Richard Curtis, who, incredible, right? Here's a guy who single-handedly set up in motion a charitable cause, comic relief, Red Nose Day, and all these things, that raised 1.6 billion pounds. That's $2 billion US. I mean, this is incredible, the power of an individual. And he's a filmmaker, he's not a businessman. He just used his skills to make a huge difference. And really, that's the theme that we have been talking about, and Pascal was just mentioning, we're 29,000 of us. Are there things that we could be doing that have a significant impact in the world? The answer is yes. What are they? Going to be completely different. For somebody from Japan, from Indonesia, from Africa, we're going to have we come from different industries, different cultures, and different parts of the world. So we're just doing a little gloss on a number of things. Obviously, there's a deep dive across the street in the Congress Center. Here, we're going to hopefully have a lot more conversational. That's the intimacy of this kind of setting. And last year, we did have a big room, and we tried to bring it a little bit smaller into little tables and things. This year, it's going to be a little bit easier. So we had Richard coming on, you've had Ian, and we are going to very shortly go into what we're really doing within YPO to celebrate the amazing achievements already of our colleagues around the world in the things that they're doing in this Impact Awards, which we'll be talking about. Tomorrow, we're starting off with the Right Honourable Claire Parry. Claire is going to be, she's the president, so we've got the climate conference being hosted in England. She is president of the climate conference, the UN Climate Conference, and she's going to be giving us a little bit of an insight as to some of the things that Ian was just mentioning in regards to the global challenges about climate. Then we have Greta Faremo, who runs UNOPS. UNOPS is the largest distributor of funds and invests in infrastructure and things. It's the United Nations arm that does a considerable amount of investment. I won't go through because there's too many. You'll know the names, Christiana Figueres and Tom. We've got things that we're doing here within YPO. There's an ocean race discussion. We have, sadly, I'm a bit embarrassed because one of the problems that we talk about in regard to Davos, and it is a criticism which is fair, is that you have a lot of the people, and Ian was just saying it, the greatest constellation of private jets, and we have already 4 or 5 billionaires just on this list and others. It is a little bit of a difficulty. Getting here, we all know, is a bit challenging, and some of you might have seen some of the protesters trying to get here today, and I don't know how effective the police were in keeping them all out, but for people who are coming from the grassroots to get here is a challenge. We hope to hear some of their voices, if not heard directly from them, but through people who understand some of the issues that they're dealing with, the frustrations, and some of the commentators that we have, including David Rubenstein, and he'll be interviewed by Irina Leiner. You might have seen David's programs on television. The Lithuanian president has just moved, and again, guys, please bear with us. You've got to realize Davos is very challenging in terms of timing. We have 4 heads of state who are planning to come in. One of them just decided he's changing his time and he's moving another head of state to another time.
Thursday, 9:30 to 10 for the president of Lithuania. Thursday, 9:30.
So he's just moving, and also we've got Andrew Forrest and Brad Keywell. So Andrew was the Global World Entrepreneur of the Year in 2018. Brad is the Global World Entrepreneur of the Year for EY's for 2019, a YPOer as well, being moderated by the Vice Chairman of EY. And then we have a Global Pulse Survey, which we're going to be which I think you'll touch on in your remarks. Then on Wednesday, again, many more interesting conversations, some governmental, some NGOs, corporate, some of it just we're mixing them up together. And finally, well, not quite finally, there's something interesting happening on Friday as well. Thursday, we're going to have, about the Edelman Trust Index. So Richard Edelman is going to be talking to us about that from 7:45. Actually, it'll probably be to 8:45 because we have another senior governmental figure who's coming in. So we haven't put everybody up, but what we are doing, and you please check your WhatsApps, is everybody on the WhatsApp. So we have 2 WhatsApp groups. There's a social one, and there's a lot of stuff happening on that, but we understand that people can find that a little bit difficult to manage. So what we're doing is we're managing very carefully the feed on the official YPO agenda WhatsApp. And there, if you please pay attention to it, because we can't change the fact that people have suddenly a bilateral and they're pulled from here to there, and they'll say we're coming in 9:45, now we're coming at 10. So just bear with us and look at your WhatsApp. We will keep you informed as soon as we know. So again, we have people from the world of business, from politics, Carrie Lam, who's the chief executive of Hong Kong. I'm sure you've heard a lot about her in the news lately. Halla, who was a presidential runner-up in Iceland and is running B Teams, B Corps, and so forth. And then in the evening, and this will be really fun. So Martin Sorrell, who, if some of you were here last year and you heard Sir Martin, he's going to be doing a fireside chat with the Mooch, Anthony Scaramucci, and I promise you it will be entertaining. And then we will celebrate at the very end the Global Impact Awards that we're just going to talk about now, and finish off with, I don't drink whiskey, but if you did, and if you do, you should definitely come along. This chap, Peter Prentice, who's going to be coming, is the foremost expert on whiskies. And although I'm not a great fan of whiskies, it is quite remarkable. He's bringing some of the finest whiskies in the world for us to have. So do come along, join us for drinks, come in during the day, watch the WhatsApp group, and join us. Pascal.
Thank you very much, Maurice. What a great program. we also want to make sure that we got time between ourselves, whether it's a micro forum or just getting to know and mingle with YPOers. The numbers of YPO in Davos is growing as we gather intelligence day by day. We're getting close to a list that is close to 150, you know? So people are going to come in and around from the WEF and so on. So my recommendation also is that you get a chance during the socials to get together. We're going to stay open on the evening. We're going to have great drinks. We're going to have nightcap. We'll stay open until 10 p.m. and beyond. So please pop up, come back, and spend time with you fellow YPOers. We also need you, yes? You are all today somehow ambassadors of YPO. We want to expose a maximum. The reason is not just about having a fantastic content, a place for YPO to mingle and to be around, but it's also for us the first time that we really want to take a stand as a prominent organization and to be Main Street and start also to interact with the World Economic Forum. We want to create that relationship. We want them to understand who we are and how our leaders are impactful. We actually have a session with the World Economic Forum with 30 of us, which will go in the space of the loft and have a first interaction and discussion with 6 of the WEF directors and executives on how we build that relationship between WEF and YPO. We also need you, please, prospects. It's amazing the numbers of people that we've met last year in Davos and the opportunity to tell new peers or new people in Davos to join YPO. And please, so come in. We have a team that can take care of them. We're also going to have our new chairman-elect, Anastasios Economou, arriving tomorrow, and he will also be there in the space Wednesday. We'll have a nightcap for meeting the new chairman and looking at the vision for YPO in the future. I want to also just not thanks my buddy Maurice, but the YNG organized by Mike that came here to help and support us to take care of the space, but also all the management in YPO, some here in the room, others in the US. I can tell you that the Christmas holidays were not a quiet holiday as we came out here to make this happen. You know, it's got some bugs. It's the first time, but we had to jump, right? Nothing's perfect, but I think it's probably the start of a tradition. And thank you so much for being part of it. So now I would like to move to the Global Impact Award. Why have we raised the Global Impact Award? We always had, of course, the Legacy Award, the Global Impact Award. It was one of those awards that we have within YPO, which was important, but the exposure was limited. But at the end of the day, the Global Impact Award is truly the DNA of our members and in YPO. The Global Impact Award is actually to honor our finest members that are doing significant, sustainable, but also scalable globally impact throughout the world. There's a difference between the Global Impact Award and our classical awards like the Hickok Award or the Alex Capello Award. The Global Impact Award is actually not what we do inside as peers for the organization, but what we do for the outside world. And let me tell you, it was an amazing moment. As past chairman, you still get to do job, and I'm still in the board of directors until June 30. And I was blessed to chair, actually, the Global Impact Award. And you know, YPO, you know how it works. If you want it to be successful, it's going to be about competition and gaming, right? So we have 14 regions in the world of YPO, and we've asked all and each 14 regions to define within their regions the #1 finalist to be presented to our organization. And there were more than 200 nominees that had amazing stories, and it was already pretty hard for the regions to skim down 200 candidates into 14. And I can tell you as the chair of the committee that all these stories are absolutely outstanding and have an amazing impact in the world. And it's been a very, very, very tough job to be able to define who would be the 6 finalists to continue on their way to San Diego, because each and every story is amazing. We have a video. Don't worry, we don't have the time for the 14, but in social medias, you will see all 14 videos of all 14 regional winners. Tonight, we are going to elect the first 3, and Thursday, with our chairman-elect, we will have the next 3. Those are the 6 finalists that will continue toward San Diego. Because what's important for us in the nomination committee is to listen to our peers and make sure that you also have a word to say. So you will also, through the 29,000 members of YPO, being asked, what is your favorite story? what is more impactful, what touch you, what's the feeling about those stories, so that the board and the committee making the elections will make its final decisions on the 3 finalists. In San Diego, during the Edge, the 3 finalists will be on stage. We will play those 3 videos, and of course, there will be only one who will stand up and get to become the award nominees of our global impact. So, with that in mind, I'm here to share with you the 3 first finalists. And what I will do is I will just give you a brief information about the member, what he did, and we will look together at those short videos of 2 minutes so that you really see the impact that they have created. The first Global Award nominee is from the region YPO Northeast USA. His name is Willie Foote, and he's the founder and CEO of Food Capital. His mission has been to invest in the growth of small agricultural projects worldwide. And he's been transforming local communities to an amazing scale. Root Capital has been able to help finance projects throughout the world for 1.4 and lending money for $1.4 billion. And that actually helped over 700 agriculture business to rise and to grow. And all those businesses are coming from Africa, from the Middle East, from Latin America, as well as Southeast Asia. He provided training to over 1,500 companies, and at the moment it's quite clear and it's up and ramping. He helped providing better incomes and better life for over 6 million people living in the most marginalized area in the world. So ladies and gentlemen, let me present you the video of Willie Foote.
I visited an association of vanilla farmers toiling to improve the livelihoods of dozens of indigenous families while drug traffickers were operating in the jungles around them. And in the end, that cooperative failed, not because of the narcos, but because they couldn't access capital, markets, basic business skills they needed to succeed. And so I said, I want to do something about that, and I want to do it at scale. Our mission at Root Capital is to invest in the growth of small agricultural businesses so they can transform rural communities. We believe that the key to unlocking opportunities for those families already exist there in their communities, and it's these agricultural businesses that can reach and connect thousands and thousands of farmers to larger markets. If they can grow, they raise farmer incomes. They create jobs in rural places. They empower women and the next generation. They help to preserve vulnerable ecosystems. We're in the boardrooms where capital decisions are made, and we also go down the dirt roads to the communities where the real innovations are created. We don't just parachute in. We earn the trust over years of working with these farmers and their businesses. And that trust and relationship is what allows us to pilot new ideas and create big change. By helping farmers adopt climate-smart agricultural practices, by creating decent jobs and economic opportunity for young people, and by integrating the marginalized workforce of women. We want to fundamentally impact the wider agricultural and financial sectors by demonstrating that these agricultural businesses are bankable, and then crowding in other institutions to replicate and adopt our work. It's all about the root causes. That's our organization's North Star in terms of being able to secure sustainable livelihoods for rural families around the world.
Our second finalist, wow, I got a stronger voice there, better take a distance. Our second finalist is from the YPO MENA region. His name is Sunil Lavani. It is interesting to know as an information that 70% of the pumps that are installed in Africa to access water, the manual pumps, are actually not operational. And Sunil is the founder and CEO of the project MAGI. And MAGI provides sustainable access through water with solar energy in a system that he engineered by himself. I met him actually in Ghana, and I see how passionate he was with this project. He's actually at the moment providing water to 50,000 people in Ghana and also Kenya, but he's growing very fast to make sure that there's access to the whole continent in clean water every day with rapid savings and growth. His objective is to reach 1 million people by 2025. Let's look at the video of Sunil Lavani.
I was on a trip in Ghana. I was driving along a dirt road, and all of a sudden my driver came to a stop. I asked him what was going on, and he said, I have to stop because there's a puddle of water in the road. I said, well, just drive through it. But he said, I can't because there's 2 kids in the water. Sure enough, they were on their daily walk to collect water, which was taking them an hour or 2 a day. I spoke to the chief in the village, and sure enough found out that a well-meaning NGO a few years earlier had in fact installed a hand pump, which, lo and behold, had broken down. It really hit my heartstrings, and I thought, as a CSR project for my business, this is a cause I'd really like to get behind. For me, building Project MAGI as a sustainable enterprise was going to be really critical. So it meant we had to put a business model around this to ensure a maintenance team could fix these if anything went wrong with them. Our solution was a solar-powered pump to replace the existing technology of the hand pump that had been used across the continent for maybe 100 or 200 years. About 6 months later, we went back to that same village and opened the tap on our first Project MAGI kiosk. When I first started this project, I thought water was all going to be about hygiene and sanitation. We found that once we gave local sustainable access in the village, the women had freed that time and they could work, or just be full-time mums. And the kids had time to go to school or just play. I hope by my example, I can inspire others to do similar things, to look at some of the world's global problems and see if they can find a business mindset to solve them.
And our third and last finalist nominee for tonight is from the YPO Southeast US and Caribbean. His name is Buddy Teaser. Buddy is the CEO of Souls for Soul. He creates sustainable jobs and provide relief through the distribution of shoes and textile. Now, over 13 years, Souls for Souls has been able to distribute, believe it or not, unbelievable numbers of 35 millions of pair of shoes to people that can afford them. Let's look at this video.
There is no question that my running has informed how important shoes are. I talked to a woman recently who ran a marathon in Cuba with runners who wanted to run so bad they taped shoes on their feet. Often, shoes are what keeps kids out of school. Parents know how important it is, and so they will go way beyond what is expected. They'll sacrifice their own meals and their own health in many cases to make sure their kids have shoes and an opportunity, especially to go to school. When I had a chance to come to Souls for Souls, I felt like it was a fork for me. This model of using business as a way to help solve a problem like poverty just spoke to me, and I really believed that that was the core big idea. One of my heroes really at Souls for Souls is a woman named Marie-Ange. She's from Haiti. And when we first met her in 2013, life was about to just sort of go over the edge for her. Her daughter was 16 and pregnant, about to start that cycle of poverty over again. She got involved with the shoe program. She works really hard. She went from almost being evicted to she bought land, which is very rare for a woman in Haiti, and she built her own house where her whole family, 3 generations, she and her husband, her kids, and their kids live together. Just this week, I was in Harlan, Kentucky, and we distributed new shoes to K through 3rd grade. And these kids, they put on new shoes and they just start dancing around, and they're like, suddenly they're faster than they were with their old shoes. And that happens in Harlan, Kentucky, it happens in Haiti, and it happens in Honduras. So there is this sort of appreciation for shoes that goes way beyond their age often or their economic circumstances, that it's a beautiful thing to see every time. I've never been happier in my life. So I feel like when I look back, whether it's college or even before, this is the path that I should be on and feel great about that.
And that's it for today. Thank you very much for your time. The 3 other finalists will be nominated on Thursday. And look forward to spend a bit of quality time together downstairs with some cocktails and drinks and time to mingle and some good YPO time. Thank you.